Good afternoon and welcome to this Springboard Science, Cognitive Science Principles in Actions webinar with Adam Boxer and Claudia Allan. Please be aware this session is being recorded and the recording will be sent to you tomorrow. Please ensure you have selected everyone as the recipient in the chat box and feel free to type in questions as the session is running. Adam and Claudia will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. At the end of the webinar, we will be sharing you a QR code with you for more information and support on Springboard Science. Please do access this at the end or via the recording. Thank you, and over to you, Adam.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Amazing. Okay, it's good to see people's faces as well. So if you can pop your camera on, that would be lovely. Claudia will introduce themselves a bit later. But I think Claudia is still seeing off some year 10s in detention. So we'll have to wait a second for that. But by the way, I don't mention that just because I'm explaining why Claudia hasn't said hello yet. But I'm mentioning it because it's worth noting that Springboard Science is written by real teachers for real teachers. There's plug number one of the evening. Good stuff. Tonight, hi, I'm Adam. We're going to be talking about Springboard. We're going to be talking in particular about cognitive science. Principles in action and how we've taken ideas from cognitive sciences and embedded them into Springboard Science. I'm a science teacher, so I've just got back from school now, and I teach at school in North London. And I'm also lucky enough to have been the series editor of Springboard Science. So I've been working with the authors to make sure that to bring the package to you. Okay, so let's have a go. Now, there we go. Introductions, did that, finished. Right. What I want to do is I've only got about 25 minutes, half an hour with you, and then Claudia is going to take over. And what I kind of wanted to do is really briefly overview what Springboard is and specifically why we made it. So like I said, I'm a science teacher. I've been teaching for a long time, and in the course of my, I've been teaching like 11 years now, and in the course of that time, I think I've used 7 different Key Stage 3 schemes of work. Some of them were published ones. Some of them were published ones that have been adapted. Some of them were ones that schools had built from scratch. Some of them were ones that schools had built by cobbling everything together. And it's sometimes when I talk about Springboard, I talk about it as coming from a positive angle and from a more negative angle. The positive angle is that we now know loads about what makes great education. We now know loads about evidence-based education, about cognitive science, about what makes a quality explanation, quality practice, retrieval practice, the multimedia effect. We know loads of stuff that comes from evidence, and that's kind of the positive thing. And we want to build something that is in line with that. The negative side is a deep sense of frustration with what comes before. And part of that is this like medley of different schemes of work that every school in the country seems to be running a different science curriculum. It's tremendously inefficient. None of the schemes of work if you're like one teacher in one department or you're a few teachers in one department, like there's no way in your game time in the summer you can suddenly build an amazing Key Stage 3 that's going to see your students through the next however many years of their schooling. It's just not physically possible. So there was a deep sense of frustration at the state of play as well. And when we set out to build Springboards, we therefore had a number of goals. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to list the goals and really briefly talk through each one. So we want to build a curriculum that, 1, is well sequenced, i.e. has some kind of sensible order. It doesn't move between topics haphazardly. We've thought through what are we going to teach A, then B, then C, then D, or are we going to teach A, then C, then B, then E, then whatever? We're going to think hard about that order. Not just that, we're also going to make it granular. So I'm going to ask you guys a quick question, okay? So you're going to answer in the chat bar. But the way I want you to do it is like this. So we're going to do what's called a chat blast, okay? So chat blast goes like this. I ask you a question, and you just type your answer. Don't press enter until I tell you to. So question from me, then you type an answer, and then you press enter when I say. Here's the question, okay? Which specialized cells are mentioned in the Key Stage 3 national curriculum? Don't press enter until I tell you. Which specialized cells are mentioned in the Key Stage 3 national curriculum? Daniel, stop it. I've got 15 seconds. Which specialized cells are in the national curriculum? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Look at that. Okay, lots of people talking about sperm, lots of people talking about root hair cells, blood cells, muscle cells, palisade cells. Okay, brilliant. A lot of us wrote none, and the answer is none. Okay, not a single specialized cell is mentioned in the national curriculum. it talks about that cells are specialized, but it doesn't say which one. This is a problem because when I'm now teaching my class, maybe the specialized cell that I choose to teach my class is the muscle cell, and maybe the teacher next door teaches the nerve cell, and maybe the teacher 3 doors down goes with root hair cell or palisade cell or mesophyll or whatever it is. And that leads to this massive like incoherence and like deeply problematic curricular situation where you don't know what's going to be taught in any individual classroom. And in departments up and down the country, this is what's happening, where you go into classroom 1 and teacher is teaching X, and you go into classroom 2 and it's the same year group, but they're teaching Y, teaching something completely different. So what we wanted to do is specify that curriculum and be granular, get to the nitty-gritty is what exactly do we want people to teach. We were really interested in coherence as well. So coherence here is really about how things like make sense. So for example, sometimes you'll have, I'll go to a school. I didn't introduce myself properly. I'm a science teacher, but I'm very lucky. On a Monday, I get to go visit schools all across the country. People say to me, Adam, will you come have a look, see what's going on, and maybe give us some advice and stuff like that. And I go to a school and I see in year 7, for example, they might be teaching the energy stores model, right? Energy stores from the Institute of Physics, chemical store, kinetic store, all of that stuff. And then I look in a year 8 class and they're not teaching the stores model. They're teaching a completely different model of energy. And they're not talking about stores of energy, but they're talking about types of energy. And whereas in year 7, they're talking about light as a pathway, in year 8, they're talking about light as a type of energy. And then that plays out in the PowerPoints and in the worksheets and in the assessments, and it's just not coherent. It doesn't make sense that you can have people thinking about specific items of science in such different ways. We wanted to combat what my friend Deep Katura, who's an amazing curriculum thinker, calls double spreaditis. Double spreaditis is the odd compulsion of publishers to make sure that every topic fits on a double spread. So whatever it is you're teaching, it has to go on a double spread on the textbook. Whether what you're teaching is big or whether what you're teaching is small, it fits on the double spread. Okay, that's what he calls double spreaditis, and it's like a shoehorning process. It does violence to the curriculum because you say, no, I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to make it fit into these 2 sheets of A4. When in reality, some things take more and some things take less. We wanted to do this for content and working scientifically. We wanted to make sure that not only had we specified what type of specialized cell we want students to learn about and which energy stores we want students to learn about, but we also want them to have a common language for solving equations, for dealing with variables, to understanding graphing, for all of those things. And that work, by the way, had never, ever been done. It's not something that any scheme of work had ever done before. We also desperately wanted to pull down teacher workloads. So like I said, teachers up and down the country are having to write their curriculums from scratch. And the workload involved in that is catastrophically large. And the number of years in a row that I've lost my game time to writing worksheets and to writing materials for a Key Stage 3 or a Key Stage 4 curriculum, it's astonishing. It's so large. So we wanted to pull down the workload in that area. But that doesn't mean we just want to like give teachers a holiday and say, oh, off you go sip a banana daiquiri in the sun and you don't need to worry about anything to do with your teaching again because we've given you a complete package. We still want teachers to be thinking about their lessons. But the thinking and the time that we want teachers to spend is not in building these worksheets, but in thinking how to execute it in the class. How am I going to build my explanation? How am I going to check for understanding? What am I going to do in the actual classroom? So what we wanted to do is take away some things so that we could give other things. And obviously we'll support teachers through that process. But the idea is that we want to free teachers to focus on things that aren't just building resources. Finally, well, not finally, I think I've got 2 more things. We wanted to get to these, like I said right at the outset, that we know a lot now about what makes great teaching, and we wanted to make sure that that was now in the scheme of work. So as opposed to just something that a teacher might be doing off their own bat, but something that's built into a scheme of work. We also wanted retrieval practice over time. We know that however brilliant your teaching is in the lesson, however amazing your explanation, how amazing your check for understanding, how amazing your worksheet or whatever it is, if students don't do retrieval practice, constant quizzing over time and returning and going back to topics, they're just going to forget it all and it'll be a waste of time. Most published schemes of work do not have that. You have your double spread, which might be about, say, pressure in fluids. So you have your bit about pressure in fluids, you have a few questions in the bottom corner, and that's it. The students never see pressure in fluids again. They might do an assessment that's got pressure in fluids, but they're never ever going to be asked a question about pressure in fluids again. We wanted to fight against that. And finally, we have this big problem where students are turning up for Key Stage 4 and they don't know anything. So my first lesson with year 10 GCSE chemistry, and I say, okay, guys, what's the definition of an element? And I see a sea of blank faces. They don't know anything. We think that the reason for that is because of everything above in the bullet point list. That all of these schemes of work, they were very surface, they weren't coherent, they weren't consistent, they weren't granular, they didn't have retrieval practice, they had this double spreaditis nonsense. And it means that basically students were just spending time in Key Stage 3 in lessons and learning very little. What I'm going to try and do is I want to show you the kind of the core elements of Springboard Science. So the main bits within Springboard Science. And through that, I'm going to demonstrate to you how we fought against all of these bullet points. So we're going to start with something called the knowledge book. And I've got one here, actually. Hello. Hello, friends. Here's my knowledge book. Okay, so this is a knowledge book. It's a lovely blue book, and this lasts for all three. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my blur off. Can I do that? Blur. No, I don't want to choose virtual background. Definitely don't want that. Sorry. Unblur. There we go. Here we go. Right, so this is a knowledge book. So students get one of these, and it covers year 7, year 8, and year 9. What we have inside the knowledge book is something like this. I'll let you just have a look for a second. So effectively, what we've done in the knowledge book is we've taken the curriculum, the National Curriculum for Science, the English Key Stage 3 National Curriculum for Science, and turned it into a granular presentation that is generally in question and answer form. So for Moments and Simple Machines, the student will open the books and they'll see that there's a series of questions and a series of answers, as well as a key diagram and potentially a worked example. This represents the distillation, the summary, the golden nugget of information that we want the students to come away with. And I think I've got a zoomed in version here. So this is what it looks like a bit closer up. And we've got pages like this for every single topic in the Key Stage 3 National Curriculum. And students have access to this. This is a book for them that they keep and that lasts them for year 7, for year 8, and for year 9. And again, what we're doing here is we're taking the curriculum, we're making it granular, we're making sure it's all in a good and sensible and coherent sequence so that it makes sense. And we've done it in question and answer format because that lends itself to quizzing, both from a teacher and from the students to self-quiz. And that means that over time, the students are going to be able to learn this stuff for themselves. That doesn't mean that's how I teach in class. Okay, I'll get to that question in a minute as well, Alex. That doesn't mean that I stand in class and I open my knowledge book and I say, what name is given to the group 1 elements? Alkali metals. Say it back to me now, children. What name is given to the group 1 elements? Alkali metals. That's not how I do it. Okay, that's not how the teaching works. Instead, what we have is something called a teacher book, and I've got one of those too. That's this thing. Okay, and this thing, I cannot like overstate it. This thing is a absolute document of glory. Okay, this is like the greatest thing to ever land on a science teacher's desk in the whole of history. Because what the teacher book does is it says how to get this stuff into the students' heads. And basically the teacher book works under under the philosophy of what's called principles of instruction. Principles of Instruction is a summary of research written by a fellow called Baruch Rosenshein in 2012. Some of you may have heard of it. There's plenty of work and books been published about Rosenshein's Principles of Instruction. But broadly, the way that we've interpreted it at Springboard is as follows. You take the thing that you want students to learn. Let's call it X. Before you teach X, you have to check that students are ready to learn X. Okay? So what you do is you'd quiz them. You'd ask them questions about X. So for example, if I'm teaching students about palisade cells, I might ask them questions about cell membranes. I might ask them questions about cell walls. I might ask them questions about photosynthesis. I might ask them questions about leaves. Okay. And I do that to check that they're ready to learn. I then can start explaining palisade cells. And we'll get to how the explanation works in a second. Once I've done my explanation, students are now, I have to check that students understand. So I'll ask questions about palisade cells to make sure that students know to make sure that students have understood and internalized the things that I have just taught them. And then finally, when I'm done with that, students can go and do some independent practice and work by themselves. And then after that, I'll review it in a cycle. So we've got checking for knowledge first, then the explanation, checking for understanding, independent practice, and then review. What does that look like? That looks like this. That's what the teacher book does. So it starts with a knowledge check like this. So this one's about cell structure. And we'll say to teachers, these are the kinds of questions you need to ask your students. I'm going to let you read for a second. Gareth, good question. I'll answer it later. So I'm about to teach about cell structure. So I get given a learning objective, a bit of information about what they've learned in Key Stage 2 and from other topics, and then a series of questions that I can ask to check that students know. Is this an exhaustive list? No, but it's a good place to start, and this will see you right. If students can answer these questions, then they'll be in a decent place in order to access the learning. I'm now ready to build my explanation, and here the teacher book kicks in again, and it gives me something like this. Okay, so if I can pull your attention back to me for a second, what we have here is something called a guided explanation. And a guided explanation is our way of helping you explain any given topic in the whole of Key Stage 3 Science. Essentially, in most cases, what it will be is a diagram or some kind of flowchart or something that might look like that. And what we'll do is we'll walk you through the steps and we'll say, hey, a good place to start would be here. A good thing to say would be this. A good place to move on to would be there. And a good place to move on to would be there and there and there, and say this and say this and say this. Again, this is not a script, right? We're not saying say this word for word, but we're giving you ideas. We're giving you a support. We're giving you a guide that will help you teach absolutely anything in Key Stage 3 Science. Now, one of the questions we had earlier was, does this only work if you've got subject specialists? And obviously then the answer is no, because we're teaching you a way to explain this effectively. So this explanation was written by Joe Castellino, who's one of the authors. Effectively, what you've got is Joe sitting next to you, saying to you how she teaches this. Now, Joe is brilliant and she really knows her stuff. Like, how could that not be beneficial for Joe to be sat there right next to you saying, oh, the way I teach this is like this? Do you have to do it exactly like that? Of course not. Would you be wise to take her advice? Probably. Does that mean that a non-subject specialist is left out in the cold? Absolutely not. Now, me personally, I've been teaching science for 11 years now, and I've been teaching Springboard since, we've been using Springboard at our school since November, and there are things that I know and that I have taught many, many times before. I am using this quite a lot. Okay, I'm using this quite a lot because I'm benefiting from the fact that I've got an expert teacher sat next to me who is showing me the way that they explain things. Following my explanation, oh, sorry, no, sorry, one other thing. I forgot. What comes with the explanation is a slide. Now, in other schemes of work, you have a PowerPoint, and your PowerPoint basically is your lesson, and it's got bullet points and pictures and diagrams and photos and whatever. We do not have that. We have PowerPoints, but the PowerPoints will look something like that. Blank. In most cases, your slide is going to be blank, because the idea is that, have I got this? Yeah, the idea is that you have your blank slide and you have your guided explanation. So here I've got one for the kinetic energy store. And here, this stuff, this I draw or I build, I construct on my blank slide. So the idea is that I'm not just smashing my way through a whole bunch of bullet points, but I am using this guided explanation, and this one was written by Tom, one of the authors. I'm using this to help me build onto here. It's a completely different approach. And the idea is that we want to empower teachers to be able to build their explanations live and to do it dynamically and organically themselves without having to rely on some bullet points and some PowerPoint that's just boom, 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 like that. Following that, you've got your check for understanding. So here's some questions from, this is from the check for understanding after a section on the Bunsen burner and how Bunsen burners work and hazards and risks and things like that. And again, we say ask questions like the ones below. This list by definition cannot be exhaustive, because if your students are screwing up and not getting this one right or not getting that one right, you'll have to adapt and you'll have to ask them different questions, right? You know, as any teacher in the whole history of teaching ever would have had to do. But the principle is that we've tried to help as much as we can. We've given you as many questions as we can, and we've started you off on that journey of checking for understanding. Sometimes there will be more information on a slide or some pictures on a slide that you can use. So for example, in the energy stores and transfers, this is a slide that's got a box with A and then this and that, whatever. And you'll explain something like A has got a speed of 1 and B has got a speed of 3. You know, again, because we're coherent, we don't start talking about meters per second until a little bit later. So you might just say a speed of 1 or a speed of 3 or whatever. And then you'll say which one has more energy in its kinetic energy store. And there'll be a bunch of slides that will help and support you like that. So for example, I've just been teaching the chemical reactions unit, and it's got a whole bunch of slides where it's got 2 reactants and then a space, and the students have to fill in the products. Following that, students are ready to do some independent practice. And at this point, they get one of these ones. And this here is my practice book. Okay. And there's one of these for every year group. So there's a practice book 1, a practice book 2, and a practice book 3. And it is absolutely chock-a-block full of just questions. There's no like information in here. It's not a textbook. It's a practice book. It's literally just the questions, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Just to give you a feel for it, in this one, this is practice book 2. So in the biology section, there are, it goes up to question 173. But as you can see, there's loads of A, B, C, D, E's, G's, F's, etc. So I imagine there's about 300 questions in the biology bit. There'll be 300 questions in the chemistry bit, 300 questions in the physics bit. Absolute minimum, right? So we're talking about 1,000 questions per year group. And also the questions are like, they vary. So some of them are kind of pretty straightforward. Is it found in both plant and animal? Or what is the function of this? What is the function of that? What's responsible for making proteins? But we also do have more exploratory and more conceptual questions. So for example, there'll be times that we have, you know, student discussions like this that you can see. The idea here is that we're trying to push students towards a more conceptual and a more abstract understanding of what's going on here. When students are done with their independent practice, it's over to the teacher. So it's about 1,500. Oh, sorry. When I counted it up, it's about 1,500. Sorry, I underestimated. It's my bad. It's about 15. I think it's probably about 1,000 to 1,500 questions a year. Okay. So the simple cycle runs like this. You start with your prerequisite knowledge check. Are they ready to learn? You move on to your guided explanation. You then check for understanding. They then do independent practice. And when they're done, you do some review. And again, in the teacher book, there's some notes as well to help you with the review. So we've got all of the answers and information about common misconceptions and things like that. Now, it's a simple cycle, okay? The cycle is simple. Executing the individual bits is not simple, right? Delivering a good explanation is not simple. Making sure that students are working well during independent practice is not simple. But what we try and do is we try and give you as much support, as much guidance, as much help as we can to make sure that when you do implement that in your classroom, you're doing it well. All right, what else have we got? We've also got retrieval over time, and this is where Carousel kicks in. So a whole bunch of people earlier asked if these questions are available in Carousel. Every single one of the questions in the knowledge book, so in this knowledge book, every single one of these questions is available in Carousel, okay? In both short answer and multiple choice form, and I'll show you in a second. You can start your lesson like this using Carousel. This for me is the way that I start every single one of my lessons. It's called the Carousel Whiteboard Quiz. I take the questions directly from that question bank. I can mix them up. I can change them. I can say, oh, these ones have to be about biology, and this one might be, oh, sorry, actually, no, this one's just about plants and about photosynthesis. But if I want, I can mix it up and I can say, right, well, I want some about biology, some about chemistry, some about physics, whatever I want. It's completely up to me. And that's the way that I'm going to start my lesson. I'm moving through this quite fast because I want to let Claudia speak. But if you are further interested in the carousel stuff, my colleague Chris is here. Chris, just give us a wave. Hello. So, and what we'll do at the end is we'll just quickly explain how you can find out more about carousel. Okay, and what students can do is they can use those Springboard questions for flashcards at home. And what they'll get is they'll get a flashcard like this that has a question on the front, and that has, sorry, and that they basically they can flip it and they'll get the answer on the back, and they can judge how well they're doing on it. Once they're done with flashcards, they can do a quiz, and the quiz will look something like this. This is a multiple choice version. So say, what are the 2 reactants involved in photosynthesis? And here are their various options and whatever. And they can work through it, or they can do one that's free text response. So in this case, we've been asked to identify a secondary consumer, and they'd write over here, ladybird. Students have the opportunity to mark their own assessment, their own quiz, so to self-assess. So for example, on this question, they were asked, what's the function of the cell membrane? The student wrote to let substances in and out of the cell, and the correct answer is to control what substances enter and leave the cell. They then judge for themselves whether or not they got it right. Because I want to pass over to Claudia in a couple of minutes, I'm going to go really, really quickly now. But broadly, what the teacher can then do is moderate student work. So they have a look at what the students have written, and they can change answers from correct to incorrect if they so choose. And they can also use Carousel to generate feedback for those students that they can then use in class. Carousel can also collect information about what the students are doing well at. So, for example, Carousel will say to a teacher, oh, by the way, students, you haven't asked students a question about photosynthesis in a long time. Now's a good time to ask. The reason why I mention all of that is because the teacher book is supreme for dealing with in-the-moment teaching. How do I explain? How do I check for understanding? How do I make sure students are practicing all of that stuff? And what Carousel does is it works on top of that over time. And it says, great, you're doing amazing teaching in the classroom. How do we make sure over time students aren't forgetting stuff? You taught them stuff in year 7. How are we making sure in year 8 that they're still doing retrieval practice on it? We taught them stuff in year 8. How do we make sure they're still doing retrieval practice on it in year 9 as well? So we've also got through Carousel detailed analytics. We've got feedback reports, those C scores that I spoke about, which is when Carousel suggests which questions to ask and when, etc., etc. And we're also going to be putting calculation questions. So we're going to put a whole bunch of questions, things like a car travels for 40 meters in a time of 10 seconds. What's its speed? So we're going to put loads of questions like that online as well. And more. Right. So what we've seen is we saw the knowledge book. So that distillation, that curriculum in question and answer format. B, we saw the teacher handbook, which walks us through any item you might want to teach. How do I check students are ready for it? How do I explain it? How do I check for understanding? How do I give them independent practice? How do I go over it? We've seen the practice book, which has got hundreds, thousands of questions for the students. And we've seen how Carousel works over time at building that retrieval practice. So I gave you a whole bunch of aims at the beginning. Let's see if we've met them. First, have we made a curriculum that's well sequenced? Yes. We've taken the national curriculum, we've figured out how we want to order the topics and how we want to order everything within those topics. We've made it granular. We've turned it into very specific statements. So we don't have generalities that say things like, students need to learn about specialized cells. We've got this specialized cell, this specialized cell, this specialized cell. What is its function? What are its adaptations? Why does it have this? Why does it have that? Why does it have the other? Everything is completely coherent. The models are consistent and coherent across the years. So for example, we use one approach to solving equations. We use one model for thinking about energy. We use, when we do things like unit conversions, right? They're all introduced at very, very specific points, and we won't ask questions about them beforehand. It's completely coherent. All the assessments and things that I haven't even mentioned match the content completely. Never is a student going to open an assessment and be like, well, that's not quite how I learned it, or sir didn't quite do it that way, because it's all perfectly coherent and perfectly consistent. Double spreaditis does not exist. Okay, the teacher book is a guide and you just walk through it. It doesn't say, oh, this bit has to fit on this page and this bit has to fit on that page. It just walks through the content at the correct pace for whatever it is you happen to be teaching. We've done it for the main content and for working scientifically. So at the front of the knowledge book, there's a whole section about working scientifically. So health and safety, analysis and evaluation, graphs, data analysis, all of that is in the front. That doesn't mean we teach at the beginning of year 7. It's spread out across the 3 years in a way that, again, like I said, is consistent and coherent. Teachers don't need to make worksheets. We have done that for you. Teachers don't need to make slides. We have done that for you. What we want you to do is to think hard about execution. We want you to say, right, well, Jo Castellino sat next to me and she has told me how she explains it in class. How am I going to use that information to then do it myself in class? Bill Wilkinson is sat next to me. He's told me how he would check for understanding whether or not students get acids and alkalis. How am I going to use that in class? Carousel is giving me information about what my students are good at and what they're not good at. How am I going to use that in class? That's all the stuff we've done so that you can do the things that really matter. Evidence-based teaching is absolutely throughout. We've paid homage to cognitive science, to educational research, to absolutely everything we can find. We have the retrieval practice over time via Carousel. And hopefully, if students do Springboard Science, they will turn up to GCSE actually knowing stuff. And you're not going to have that moment where you're standing and saying, okay, guys, what's the word equation for photosynthesis? And nobody knows what you're talking about. I've been waffling for quite a long time now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass over to Claudia, who will introduce themselves. And then all the questions, a lot of people have asked questions. We're going to answer those questions at the end if there are any that we haven't got to yet. So, Claudia.
I just want to check that you guys can hear me because I didn't get to do that at the beginning. Thumbs up if you can hear me. Nice. Okay. So we've been very lucky here. I'm the head of science at a North London academy, and I'm also one of the authors. So we've kind of had the opportunity to kind of trial things a little bit before it went to print. And that means that we've kind of been able to see how it actually works within the classroom. I can see that there are lots of questions in the chat. So I'm going to try and answer some of those as I go. And I'm sure that there will be more kind of develop. If you just stick them in the chat and we will get to them. So the first one, let me see. Is this a kind of like a COVID situation where I say next slide, please? All right. Okay.
I've done the next slide for you. It's there.
Perfect. Sorry, the cleaners just come in to clean my office for us. Okay, so the first thing was sort of how has Springboard been implemented in our centre. We did originally have to use the kind of the paper resources because we didn't have the print versions yet. They weren't out. So I kind of keep that in mind as I kind of talk. Each student gets a knowledge book and they get to keep that knowledge book themselves. They will have it in year 7. They will hopefully keep it with them into year 8 and potentially into year 9 as well. Whereas the practice books, we keep them in class. It means that we kind of, the resources that they are going to have to be most used to using, they get to keep themselves, and they can, when they're at home, look through it, use it, get very, very just literally used to using it. And then when you say to them, have you looked in your knowledge book for the answer? How have you, what could you do in order to get your correct answers? They are, they have it there, and they just, oh yeah, I know what page it's on. And they use it like that. Every single teacher who is teaching Key Stage 3 gets a copy of the knowledge book for the year that they are teaching. So there's a year 7, teacher book. There's a year 7 teacher book, there's a year 8 teacher book, and there's that year 9 teacher book. And so our year 7 teachers have that year 7 book, our year 8 teachers have that year 8 book, and that is theirs. They don't have to, share it. It doesn't have to go back into a prep room somewhere and be kept. And then that means that they are just as familiar with that teacher book as their students are with their knowledge book. We've used the slides that are available, but within my department, they're semi-autonomous. We expect that we deliver content using that kind of blank canvas method of leaving the slide, drawing the diagrams, building up that explanation as we go. But some of my team like to put the PowerPoints onto OneNote and then kind of go out sideways and use a lot more space, whereas I know that a lot of my team are much more comfortable using the PowerPoints and drawing directly onto those PowerPoints. For one of the questions that came up was about the kind of the 2-year Key Stage 3 versus the 2-year GCSE. At the moment, we have only taught a 2-year Key Stage 3. As part of the trial, I didn't feel like it was appropriate to change all of year 9 really suddenly. It's going to be part of Key Stage 3 again. You're going to be using this whole new resource. That felt a little bit unfair to my team. And so we have just put it in year 7 and year 8. What we're finding though is that students are, because they're getting that extra practice that they weren't necessarily getting before, because they're getting those kind of integrated questions that make them recall stuff from previous topics. They're not getting things wrong as badly as they did before. They, frequency of getting things wrong is sorry, it's been a very long day. So they're getting things wrong less frequently, and when they are wrong, they're closer to the right answer. What that means is that I am more confident that going into year 9, they will have that strong foundation, and there is a possibility that I think that we will, in time, bring that year 9 back into Key Stage 3, and they will do all those 3 years of the Springboard course. The reason that a lot of schools do the 3-year GCSE is because it's so big. There's so much stuff that they need to know at GCSE. With the Springboard, we're finding that their foundations are much, much stronger. And so I'm pretty confident that by the time they get to GCSE, they're not going to need as long to grasp some of those concepts, because they're going to have such a strong foundation to build on. What has changed about the way that we teach? So it's we found that it's freed up a lot of time, and kind of Adam spoke about this earlier, about it's not a case of going and having cocktails on the beach, but it means that my team can think very, very deeply about how to tailor their explanation, how to direct their questions for the class in front of them. Which student is going to get which question? Why do I need to ask that child that particular question? And that's really important stuff that we don't normally necessarily have the time for, and it kind of gets forgotten a little bit. But because the explanations are planned and laid out by people who know what they're talking about, it means that that's kind of dealt with. And now I can think about my class and how am I going to do it for these children. It also means that we don't have to necessarily teach Key Stage 3 with subject specialists. We are very, very lucky here that we have 2 physics teachers in our department. A lot of schools, they have 1 physics teacher if they're lucky. At Key Stage 3, I expect my team to teach biology, chemistry, and physics, regardless of their specialism. With Springboard, the explanation has been planned by somebody who is teaching within their specialism. And so they get to rely on and almost like pick the brain of somebody who knows very, very much what they're talking about and use that. It is not a script. It is not like I would expect to walk into any one of my teachers' classrooms and see them reading directly from the teacher book. I would not expect that at all. And I'd be quite frankly a little bit disappointed if I saw that. But it means that the foundations for our staff are there in just the same way as they are for the children. In terms of what my team has said about it, those are on your screen now. It improves the quality of their lessons. We've got quite a few new teachers in our department, and they find that planning takes so much of their time, and sometimes they don't know where to start. But with Springboard, they're finding that they know what it is specifically the national curriculum is on about when it says things like students should be able to explain energy changes in reactions, qualitative. They don't have to try and work out what that means because it's there for them. It's cutting down their planning time. And one of our ECTs said that it was the Holy Grail, which, I mean, I agree with him. In terms of other kind of things that has changed, with the kind of boost resources that we get with it as well, there's retrieval sheets, there's sheets about careers, there's stuff about kind of the stories around the science, and those have been really, really useful to us as a department if we need to set cover. It means that we're not having to kind of, you know, oh, what could they do today? Well, maybe they could watch a video, and it means that every single student is getting something really, really valuable for them every single lesson, even if their teacher happens to be off sick at some point. And what the students have said is that they've really enjoyed using it as well. One of them said something that really stuck with me. They said, it doesn't hide the answers. They get their knowledge book. If they're stuck on a question, they know where to look in the knowledge book. It has the diagrams, it has these core questions, it has everything that they need, and they don't have to hunt for it, and they know that it's going to be there. I'm going to kind of pause there because I can see that there are quite a few questions coming in on the chat, and kind of Adam.
Okay, so thank you for that, Claudia. So there was one question about, does Springboard aim to take this approach to GCSE Specs 2, or wait to see if a new curriculum is introduced in the next few years? Who knows? Who knows? There are no plans as of yet, to the best of my knowledge. Then we answered Alex's question. So we answered the question about specialists. Gareth has asked, are there electronic copies of each of the books that could be accessed online at home by students or staff, or is it physical copies only? That is not a question I can remember the answer to. It could be that Hodder will be able to unmute themselves and give a better answer than I could to that.
Yeah, so is it. Yeah, so the knowledge book has electronic copies, and so does the teacher handbook, but the practice books are hard copies only. Hope that helped.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Okay, in which case, if you have any more questions, bang them into the chat. I'm going to go to the next slide, which says as follows. Do you want to know more about Springboard KS3 Science? If the answer is yes, you can scan what. If the answer is no, it might be you've not been listening. But if you have been listening, I assume the answer to that will be yes. And you can scan this wonderful QR code, which will get you to one of our local consultants, and they'll get you a sample pack. And if you want to know more about Carousel, one second, I think, Chris, do you want to just really quickly unmute yourself?
Hello. Feel free to visit www.carousel-learning.com and click on partners. I'll drop that URL into the chat to learn more and to book in a demo where I can show you a little bit better how the two work hand in hand.
Superb. Thank you, Chris. Right, I'm going to answer some questions, okay, because I've got a slide that says any questions. That tells me I should answer questions now. So I've got one from Helen, which is about EAL and lower ability students. How's this been addressed? So the first thing is, of course, the entire teaching approach is geared around supporting all students, and teaching like this is almost guaranteed to be more effective for your EAL and lower ability students than teaching in any other way. Use of the knowledge book as a support is profoundly powerful for every student. The fact that you've got absolutely everything clearly delineated, every definition you could ever need in the knowledge book is extremely, extremely useful for all students. But fundamentally, because we haven't done this double spreaditis as well, it means that teachers have time and the flexibility to be able to dictate the flow of work. They're not forced to say, oh, it's lesson 1, I need to do C 2.3, and because in lesson 4, I've got to move on to C 2.4. That's not how it goes, okay? You let the time expand and contract to the students who are in front of you. You can then supplement that at the top end with additional challenge work that is found on Boost, and you can support that at the bottom end with support work that's also found on Boost. So there's plenty for everyone. Does the teacher guide provide info on how to spread the content between lessons? No, because we don't know how long your lessons are, so we can't do that. I don't know if your lessons are 50 minutes or 55 minutes or 60 minutes. My lessons are 100 minutes. So what we do in the teacher book is at the beginning, and there's an introduction that talks about the best way to kind of sequence your instruction and to make it work within your context. But fundamentally, we're not in the business of telling you this bit has to go in this 60 minutes and this bit has to go in the next 60 minutes. We sort of trust you to do that, to be able to make the best decision for your students about that. Adrian, will Springboard work for teachers that don't like using slides at all? Well, you are talking to one. I'm using a PowerPoint for this presentation. It's kind of, I'll be honest with you guys, it's kind of stressing me out because I don't use PowerPoint in my teaching. I haven't used PowerPoint in my teaching for 5.5 years. So I use OneNote. And the way that I use the slides is I paste them into my OneNote and then I just write all over them. So I don't use PowerPoint at all. And actually, once I've answered all the questions, I'll try and open up my OneNote so I can show you what that looks like. Phil's already got them. Good work. There's a link from Carousel with some information about Springboard as well. How would you suggest introducing Springboard into a scheme of learning? Full switch of a topic, full course switch. We've bought teacher books and samples of the others so far. That's a bit difficult for me to answer because it sort of depends on your team. It depends on the curriculum that you're running already, how well you think it's going. Me personally, I'm the kind of guy that would ordinarily say just swap us. If you think that you can put it like this, if you think you can do a better job for your students right now, if you just change the Springboard tomorrow, then do that. If you think you'd rather let things go as they are and get everyone ready and then prepare and work really hard so that we're ready to go in Easter, then do that. It's not something that I can answer so well in the abstract. All I can give is like general like principles of thought when it comes to stuff like that. That's Helen. Claudia, this one's for you from the Castle School.
Yes, we have moved away completely from booklets for Key Stage 3. It's not something that we've necessarily found that if a student misses a lesson, that they then don't catch up. We've kind of, I don't know what the solution is, I'm afraid, on that one, but it's not something that we've kind of identified as being a massive issue. But we have moved away from the booklets, yeah.
Muted. Sorry. Okay. Thank you, Claudia. Josh says, who do you think will be doing this? Do you mean, Josh, you're going to have to give me a bit more detail than that. I'm sorry. I'm not 100% sure what you're asking there. Kath has said we have some pretty decent stuff based on your swap and carousel. Great. Good stuff, Kath. Sam has said you talked about the sequencing and how topics were visited for retrieval. Is there a document or anything that shows sequencing? Yes. There's an overview document that shows all of the units in order. But by and large, you can also just, if you just open the front of the knowledge book, it'll all be there. So that was Sam. Right. So what I can do now is I can show you what my OneNote looks like. Let me just see if I can get it to load. Give me a minute. Hang on. Okay. So here is, I'm going to bring it over. Let's see if this works. Can you see my notebook? Great. Okay, so what I'm going to do is it's a bit clunky because I'm not on my tablet at school, but this is, one second, I'll do the next one because that was a nicer slide. There we go. So this was from the P4.2, which I've just been doing with my year 8s, which is about atmospheric pressure. So all I've done is I've just taken the slides and I've just pasted them into OneNote here. And what you can see is that I use my explanations come out over here. So here are my explanations. This is how I built up to an explanation about pressure and fluids. We looked at air. So this was about air pressure already. So we've done pressure and fluids in the previous lesson. We talked a little bit about Bernoulli's principle. So by the way, that's not in the teacher book. We just went beyond, right? Because my students were interested and I wanted to talk about it. And then here was kind of some check for understanding-y type stuff. And then you can see as we go down, you'll see another bit here. So the next explanation was involved with air pressure and atmospheric pressure and how it changes the higher up you get. And again, you'll see all my diagrams and the ways that I've checked for understanding over there. And I think that's pretty much where I got up to in that lesson. But what you should see as well is, I think, did I do? Yeah, here. So actually what you can see here is where I've gone over some answers and there are some bits and pieces that I've noticed students needed a bit more work on. So here's a bit that I pulled from Carousel. So students were giving poor answers to this question. So what I wanted to do for them is to model how I wanted them to do it. So I did not want them to do it like this. I wanted them to do it like this. And we did loads of examples. And again, I just very free, very dynamic. And it meant that I could give them follow-ups. So here I've said the thing that I want them to do is to put one variable first, the second variable second, and to talk about whether they're increasing or decreasing. And then to make sure they've got it, I do another example here, another example there. And then I noticed that their balancing equations needed a bit of work. So we did a bit more balancing. They then did some work themselves. They did some more work on acids and bases and things like that. And then I chucked in another relationship question underneath. So it's really like quite free, quite dynamic, quite organic. There's a lot of information in the teacher book to guide me. And when students do practice in the practice book, I again have that pasted into OneNote and I write my work all over it. So I write answers there, and you can see those are in purple because that's what we assess in. And so students are following along and assessing their work as we go. We do that all together. So that's kind of like a really the briefest snapshot I can offer you as to what it looks like for me inside the classroom. Okay, let's move that off now. Kath, when you introduced us to your department, did you model the use of the materials? I'm guessing your team were pretty much on board with your rationale already. Yes, Claudia did indeed model what to do. So I work for Claudia as my boss. Claudia is my head of department. So Claudia did model it. We spoke about it extensively in meetings, but also we have on Boost, there are videos showing how, and videos of various authors showing how they use it in the classroom. So you've got models there as well. Woo, 4:31. Any other questions? Josh, sorry, 1 second. Right, sorry, Corey, I couldn't see it because it was replied to that one. 1 second. Okay, regarding my question about spreading content between lessons and lessons, who do you expect to be divvying this into lessons on department level? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Claudia to answer that and to talk about our checkpoint system and what we do at our school.
Sorry, I've missed the question.
Claudia, essentially the question was about how you put things into lessons, because our opinion is that we shouldn't be saying to people, this bit has to go in this lesson and this bit has to go in that lesson. So Claudia, I want you to talk through what we do at our school and our checkpoint thing.
I'm really sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm going to answer the question. Can you nod if you can hear me? Okay, everyone but Claudia can hear me, whatever. Basically what we do is we have a checkpoint system. So we start the teaching, and then every kind of 5 to 6 weeks or so, we effectively just ask teachers where they're up to. And we have a spreadsheet where we track where everybody's up to. And if there's ordinarily, the way it works out is that basically people are always in line anyway. But if someone is like miles ahead, we might ask them to slow down a bit. And if someone is miles behind, we might ask them to pick up the pace a little bit and talk to them about why they think and why we think it's going a bit slower for their classes, so we can make adjustments there. But Claudia would never say to me, P4.2 has to be done in lesson 1 and lesson 2. P4.3 has to be done in lesson 3, because what we believe and what Springboard believes is that you should be able to tailor and adapt to your class and work through at a pace that suits and that you can't necessarily predict. To Sam's question about the contents page in the knowledge book, it's got all the topics, but not broken down. So in the knowledge book, does it not break it down by year group? I can't remember. No, you're right, it doesn't. So that for that, you have to look at the curriculum map, and Alex is going to, there's a link to that. So Alex will provide that soon. Okay. Is there a suggested order to interleave in terms of biology, chemistry, physics? So what we've tried really hard is we know that schools are very different in terms of the way they teach things. Some schools do biology in one term, then chemistry, then physics. Some schools do biology, chemistry, physics, etc., etc. So effectively, the way it works is for a year, so year 7, you can teach C1, B1, and P1 in any order you like, but you cannot teach C2 before C1 or C3 before C2. So within the sciences, it has to go C1, C2, C3, B1, B2, B3, P1, P2, P3, but across those 3, you can do it in whatever order. So you could say, we want to do B1, B2, B3, then C1, C2, C3, then P1, P2, P3, or you could say B1, C1, P1, B2, C2, P2, etc. You could even say B1, then C1, C2, C3, whatever, so long as the individual sciences are in order. We've tried to make it so that things don't rely on each other where they're too close to each other. So for example, you won't find stuff in, say, B2 that relies on C2, but you might find stuff in B3 that relies on C1. So in like, you know, if you've done like a particle model in C1, it could be that in when you get to like diffusion in B3, there's some bits that rely on that. Where we've done that too heavily, we've made that really clear in the knowledge book, and we've signposted you how to bridge that gap if you've not done it yet. So by and large, we've made that sequence so that it should, obviously there will always be a teacher somewhere that it doesn't work for, but it should work for 99%. Okay, and hopefully that answers your question, Josh. And whoever that was as well, that was Sam. Okay, Are there any worksheets available, or is it only PowerPoints? Are there any assessments pre-prepared? So every unit has an assessment, and there's an assessment at the end of year as well. And worksheets, well, that's your knowledge book for the most part, as well as your additional worksheets on Boost. So on Boost, there's additional retrieval practice, there's additional support work, there's additional stretch and challenge, there are science stories, and did I miss anything? I think that's a lot.
Careers?
Yeah, there's career stuff as well. Good point. If the class is only taught by one teacher, yeah, you just have your sequence. So it might be you do B1, C1, P1, then B2, C2, P2, whatever. But that's up to you. Okay, Claudia just answered that. Brilliant. Last question, Josh, is checkbook system? No, that's just how our school does it. But you can work out what works best for yours. Yeah, I think the checkbook system is a good way of doing it, but there are conceivably other ways. Have you noticed any confusions about units being called B1, B2, but not the same as the Key Stage 4 units with the same names? No, because technically the Key Stage 4 units are not called that. They're called like 5.4, 0.6, 0.3, 0.2 if you're AQA or whatever. It's only the publishers that decides to give them labels. Okay, so you know, and schools. So you know, you can run that however you like. Hannah, do you do end of topic tests? Yes. So you've got. Yes, you can definitely use Carousel for your kind of ongoing low stakes formative assessment. You have end of topic assessments and you have end of year assessments. Are there answers, Sam? Yes, there are answers in Boost. And Phil's, we've tried really hard on the additional sheets to make sure that we've got like good representation, especially on the science stories and the science careers work. We have tried to do that as much as we can. Yeah. Anyone else? I'm knackered. Okay,
Thanks, Adam. Do you want to wrap up there? Are we good?
Yes, I tell you what we'll do is if you do the formally finish it, we can stop the recording or whatever, and people are more than welcome to head off and enjoy the rest of the evening. Claudia and I will hang around in case there are any more questions that people want to ask. But in the meantime, guys, thank you so much. Please use the QR code if you want to talk to anyone. And we have a whole like load of FAQ documents and stuff like that. So we're here to help, and we want to do as much as we can. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Kath. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you everyone for coming, and just a quick reminder that the recording will be emailed to you tomorrow along with a link to a feedback survey. I have also posted the survey link in the chat box, and I would really appreciate if you could take the time to give us your feedback. If you are looking for more information on Springboard Science, like Adam said, please click on that QR code, and that way you can book your appointment with your local consultant. So scan away, please. And again, thank you very much for your time, and we hope to see you again. Thank you.
Just further to that as